Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Today, I want to introduce you to some of the Oxford English Dictionary's 2020 Words of the Year. For the first time ever, the Oxford Dictionary was unable to choose one single standout word from the previous 12 months. Instead, as a consequence of the unprecedented events of 2020, they have highlighted a number of highly significant developments in our vocabularies. So, I'm going to introduce you to some of the words and phrases included in the Word of the Year report. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page? Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. It's full of great vocabulary content, pronunciation lessons, and grammar. And you should definitely look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all of the transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written vocabulary list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Unprecedented. Unprecedented. If something is unprecedented, it has never happened or existed in the past. For example, this century has witnessed environmental destruction on an unprecedented level. Prominent. Prominent. If something is prominent, it is very well known and important. For example, he is a prominent politician in his country. Lexicographer. Lexicographer. A lexicographer is a person whose job is to write dictionaries. My friend wants to be a lexicographer. Momentous. Momentous. Very important because of effects on future events. For example, whether or not to move overseas was a momentous decision for the family. To encompass. To encompass. This means to include different types of things. For example, that festival is to encompass everything from music, theatre and ballet to literature, cinema and the visual arts. Linguistic. Linguistic. Connected with language or the study of language. For example, she is researching the linguistic development of young children. Epidemiologist. Epidemiologist. An epidemiologist is someone who studies diseases and how they are found, spread, and controlled in groups of people. For example, they are epidemiologists studying the causes of diseases. To impeach. To impeach. To make a formal statement saying that a public official is guilty of a serious offense in connection with their job, especially in the USA. The governor was impeached for wrongful use of state money. To be completely honest with all of you listening, I've actually been planning on making this episode for over a month. At the end of November every year, Oxford University Press, which publishes the Oxford English Dictionary, as well as a number of other dictionaries, announces an Oxford Dictionary's UK Word of the Year and an Oxford Dictionary's US Word of the Year. These are sometimes the same word. Although the Oxford English Dictionary is not the only or even the first organisation to run a Word of the Year competition. As a British person, I feel attached to Oxford's choices. Therefore, I thought the Word of the Year announcement would be an excellent opportunity to introduce all of you to a new piece of vocabulary, as well as exploring some of the previous winners. I will still look at some of the previous winners, but I am not able to focus on one specific word of 2020. Due to the unprecedented events of this year and the incredible developments in the vocabularies of all major languages caused by these events, Oxford expanded its yearly award to include multiple words of the year. Before I introduce you to some of these words mentioned in the Oxford English Dictionary's announcement, let me explain how the winner is usually chosen and what are the requirements for a word to be included. To be selected as the word of the year, the word does not have to be invented within the past 12 months, but it does need to have become prominent or notable during that time. Interestingly, the word might not actually be in the dictionary, and even if it wins the Word of the Year title, it doesn't automatically get included in future editions. The Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year are selected by editorial staff from each of the Oxford dictionaries, including lexicographers and consultants to the dictionary team, and editorial, marketing, and publicity staff. For the first time ever, there is not one single word of the year this year. For what reason? According to Oxford Dictionaries, 2020 has seen so many momentous events that it has expanded its word of the year to encompass several words of an unprecedented year. Caspar Grathwohl, the president of Oxford Dictionaries, said, "I've never witnessed a year in which language like the one we've just had. The Oxford team was identifying hundreds of significant new words and usages as the year unfolded, dozens of which would have been slam dunk for Word of the Year at any other time. 2020 is a year which cannot be summed up in one single word. There were too many words to describe the events of 2020. All languages evolve over time, especially in response to social, political, technological, environmental, cultural, and scientific changes. The events of 2020 have been so unprecedented, and that there have been so many changes, that our vocabulary has developed dramatically over just the past few months. So let's look at some of the new words mentioned by Oxford dictionaries in their words of the year. The language of COVID-19 has been strongly influential. Although the word coronavirus was first used in the 1960s and mainly used by scientific and medical specialists, by April of this year, it had become one of the most frequently used nouns in the entire English language. By May, the term COVID-19 became more common than the word coronavirus. And incredibly, COVID-19 also became more common than the word time. The arrival of the pandemic in the English-speaking world saw surges in the use of circuit breaker, lockdown, and shelter in place, along with support bubbles, face masks, PPE, medics, delivery drivers, and key workers, frontliners, or essential workers. All of these words and phrases reflect the developing health situation this year. One of the year's most remarkable linguistic developments has been how many scientific terms have entered the public's vocabulary, as we have all become amateur epidemiologists. Phrases that used to be only used by scientists, such as R number, flatten the curve, and community transmission, are now commonly used by everyday people. One of the consequences of COVID-19 has been the radical change in work life. Since March 2020, hundreds of thousands of people around the globe have been forced to work from home rather than commuting to their offices. Connected to this, the words remote and remotely have seen a growth of more than 300% since March. Moreover, the words mute and unmute have had a significant rise in usage this year as well. These are very useful words for Zoom calls, Skype, Microsoft Teams, or any other video platform. Other words getting a lot more use include workation, a holiday in which you also work, and staycation, a holiday or vacation at home or in your home country. Other news events have also been reflected in our language. I actually forgot that in early 2020, Donald Trump, the president of the USA, was impeached by the US House of Representatives. So in the early months of 2020, the words impeachment and acquittal were used all the time. The US election also contributed to popular vocabulary choices, especially mail-in, which has seen an increase of nearly 3,000% in use. Use of Black Lives Matter and BLM also surged in usage this year. Clearly, there have been so many newly popular words this year, and our everyday vocabularies have evolved so dramatically that it is impossible for the Oxford Dictionary to choose just one word of the year. I have mentioned so many words in this article that it is also impossible for me to explain the meanings of all of them. So I really recommend all of you look through the transcript of the podcast, which is available on my blog, and look up any words you don't understand. They are all so useful and convenient to help you understand contemporary conversations, news reports, and articles. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I'm going to briefly talk about a few previous winners of Oxford's Words of the Year. These are a few of my personal favourites. The 2009 UK Word of the Year was awarded to simples. This choice is fascinating because simples is a catchphrase from a car insurance commercial featuring a meerkat. Think about that. So many British people were quoting the catchphrase of a squeaking CGI meerkat that simples became Word of the Year. 2012's winner, and definitely my favourite winner, was omnishambles. Omnishambles refers to a situation that has been comprehensively mismanaged, categorized by a string of blunders and miscalculations. It was popularized by the political satire The Thick of It. If any of you are curious about British politics, I strongly recommend you watch The Thick of It. It might actually be on Netflix right now, but it is one of my favorite TV programs all the time. It actually got me interested in politics and is one of the reasons I studied political science at university. 2015's Word of the Year wasn't even an actual word. It was the crying, laughing emoji. So here is today's final thought. What is your personal word of the year? What word have you learned this year that has been the most useful or interesting to you? 2020 has introduced hundreds, if not thousands, of new words, phrases, and idioms into our vocabularies. Have you struggled to keep up with these changes? For the first part of 2020, I was living in Taiwan, which compared to the rest of the world was barely affected by the pandemic. So when I returned to the UK, there were so many changes to the language that I had to get used to. My family were using scientific terms around the dinner table. All of my friends were talking about workations and were working from home. And the media was speaking in a completely different way than a year before. Do you think that these changes to our language are permanent? We've talked before about how language can affect the way you think. So, do you think that the linguistic developments of 2020 will change our thought processes in the future? What do you think? If you would like to read more about the Oxford English Dictionary's words of the year, I'll leave the link in the transcript and also in the description of the podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. If you have any ideas for topics, future podcast guests, or other learning formats, please let us know. And please leave us a rating. We're also now on Instagram. I'm producing daily content focusing on improving your vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. So make sure you check out the Thinking in English page. Thinking in English podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Instagram is also probably the best way to contact me. All transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary lists, comprehension questions, and articles are all there for you to read, as well as some exciting bonus content. The link is also in the description, so please check it out. Thank you, and see you next time.